Welcome to Dev Diary, the series where I try to make my own video games. And look, I've already had one idea to merge the mechanics from the Katamari series with Vampire Survivors, but I've got another one. So let's try also making that one a reality while also continuing to, learn more about making 3D games. Now, first and foremost, major improvement on my first attempt at a 3D game. Now, admittedly, today we're also using several Kenny assets here to save on time. And for those of you who don't know, Kenny is actually a really great free resource for both 3D and 2D assets. Honestly, highly recommended. And finally, as a quick reminder before we jump in, this is my second attempt at a fully 3D project, and we are still very much in learning territory here. So expect to see a lot of unoptimized and newbie mistakes. Anyway, let's begin with the player here, who is in fact a dog. They can move freely in the world with WASD and can do their main attack with left click, which is this sort of a lunge/dash attack of sorts. Now, obviously the player isn't dashing at nothing in the world. It's actually populated by a ton of different animals. And you may notice some animals that wouldn't ever be found in the same biome/environment. But hey, this is a silly game about stacking animals. Let's, not get too caught up in the details, yeah? So, the player can dash into animals and damage them. Do enough damage and they'll enter a knocked out state, where they can then, maybe, be picked up. And this is where the fun begins. Now, you may have noticed these little pop-ups when the player gets near an animal, and if you're really observant, then you probably also noticed that the icons are similar to the icons at the top left of the screen. These icons refer to the player's carry weight and carry strength. See, each animal is given both a carry weight and required strength value that the player must pass in order to pick them up. Now, the player starts at just 1 star in strength. In order to improve their strength, they must band together with other animals and pull their strengths together to carry heavier animals. And so the player is going to have to be strategic about their animal acquisitions. Starting with lighter animals like the bees or the crabs, and then moving up to larger animals like cats and monkeys. Then eventually cows and elephants, and then maybe even a giraffe. As long as the player remains within their carry limit, almost any animal can eventually be picked up and added to their tower of power. Now, why would the player want to collect a tower of animals? Well, that's where the big old target indicator thingy comes into play. Also, that spaceship that we've, kind of just been pretending doesn't exist until now. So basically, the player is tasked with sending an animal into space via the spaceship, which is chosen entirely at random with each delivery made. Now, as long as that animal is in the player's tower, they can visit the spaceship and begin the delivery process. This will remove the target animal from the player's tower, and the ship will exit the atmosphere. It eventually returns with a new animal target, and the process repeats itself. And the mystery space overlords may request something as light and small as a bee, or as large and bulky as a giraffe. You just never know with these crazy space overlords. So that's the Katamari side of things, right? We've got different size limits that the player must build up to in order to reach a target. That plus the whole, stuck to the player thing kind of rounds things out there. So how does Vampire Survivors fit into this whole thing? Well, the animals that the player gathers aren't just there for their strengths. Now, each animal has their own special and unique abilities. Now, these abilities become available to the player when they're added to the Tower of Power and trigger on their own as they would in Vampire Survivors. Primarily, these attacks are to, help soften up nearby animals, but they do also serve another purpose. More on that later, but first, let's do a rapid fire rundown of all the animals featured and their special abilities. First up is the beaver. Their special is to spawn a log that'll orbit the player a bit, and it'll damage anything that it touches. Basically the Bible from Vampire Survivors. The bee will create a swarm of tiny bees that will then hone in on and attack nearby animals, and the amount of bees spawned are random. The bunny is one of the few animals who don't attack. Instead, they actually boost the player's movement speed as long as they are part of the tower. Cats do a sand attack, which not only comes with this cool debris effect, but also temporarily stuns any nearby animals caught in their spread. Up next is the cow, another attribute helper. The cow will give the player a large strength boost, again as long as they're part of the Tower of Power. The crab is up next and they do a pretty wide melee attack, basically the whip from Vampire Survivors. The elephant will increase the player's max carry weight. The giraffe has a similar attack to the crab, only instead of like a wide swipe, this one is more of like an extended stab move. Great for distance, which will be important, so remember this. The monkey does what you're probably already thinking. They throw poop, and poop hurts. Poop also pops into poop debris. Also, fun fact, I had to model the crab, giraffe, and monkey attacks. So yeah, I had to model poop for this project. Moving on, the parrot is a cool one actually. As long as the player has another animal that is not a parrot in their Tower of Power, the parrot will randomly copy a random animal's attack. So if you've got a bee, the parrot may also do a swarm attack, or, you know, maybe throw some extra poop if you've got a monkey on board. And our final animal and unique attack is the penguin. The penguin will create an orb of freezing around the player, and any animals caught in that orb will be frozen, slowing their movement speed for a short time. Now there are actually 2 more animals that spawn in the world, but they cannot be picked up, and in fact it's best to avoid them at all costs. Because if near enough to a polar bear or tiger, these hunters will begin to pursue the player, and if in range, they will take a swing at our hero. And if they are successful, if the player is carrying any animals, one will be knocked off at random, both weakening the player and in some cases even causing a domino effect of losing even more animals. So honestly, keeping a distance or letting the Tower of Power do its thing are probably the best approaches. There is really no real benefit to taking these big baddies down, so swarm and poop at will. And so that about sums up the Katamari Survivors Like combo. This was a very interesting learning experience actually. Like compared to my first project, this was a large step up in terms of features. Like just getting this many trees to spawn in without tanking the frame rate was a learning experience in itself, and making sure that the models wouldn't obscure the camera's view was another. And actually basically the entire transition of 2D to 3D was a trip, and yet there is still so much left to learn. And while I wouldn't say I'm completely satisfied with the end results of this project, I honestly think that this was a great step forward in my 3D game dev journey. Like at this point, with more practice of course, I'm confident that we're gonna end up with some cool stuff, in the future. Until the math gets me and I crumble into the fetal position as numbers erode my brain into mush. I mean, until then, I'm excited for the future. So, what do you think? Is this an idea worth coming back to for a second go, one day, perhaps after I've learned to tame the beast that is 3D game dev? Or, what other projects should we experiment with next? As always, let me know your thoughts and ideas in the comments. And hey, while you're at it, if you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like. If you would like to support the channel further, I am on Patreon, and consider subscribing if you're new to the channel. But with that said, this has been Dev Diary, the series where I try to make my own video games. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.